So welcome everybody. This is Heather Riggs with the New England Museum Association. I'm here in Arlington. Our offices are usually in Somerville. Our offices are usually in Arlington. Want to welcome everybody today for the town hall on interactives. I would like to thank Beth Weller and Brindha Muniappan, our Children's Museum people. Beth is on our Children's Museum PAG chair, and Brindha is a board member of NEMA. So they came together to create this town hall because we do have a bunch of questions about opening our sites to more interactive museums and stuff like that. So to get us going, I should also mention that today's town hall is being recorded and will be available on the NEMA website later on this afternoon if you have to leave a little bit early or you wanted to maybe send it to a friend or a colleague that wasn't able to make it. So I'm actually going to push it off to Brindha and Beth to get us going. Just a reminder that you do have multiple choices to actually communicate. So you can either use the chat feature or you can unmute yourself. So this is the one nice thing about the town halls is that we actually get to hear your voice. We do miss hearing your voices and stuff. So don't be afraid to actually unmute and to talk a little bit. So Brindha and Beth, I'll push it over to you guys now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the town hall. Beth and I were really hoping for a good turnout because basically, we want to hear from all of you. There's lots that we're hoping to learn, and it seems like a wonderful venue to just have a discussion about a number of issues that we're all probably, thinking about, hoping to implement, already implementing, or are wondering how the heck we're gonna do some of these things. So Beth and I are in museums that are in different states. I'm at the Discovery Museum in Massachusetts, and Beth is in Connecticut and at the Children's Museums there. So, we're bringing not only slightly different perspectives, but also different phases in time for reopening, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, Beth is probably one of a few people in this group who are about to reopen, or organizations that are about to reopen, and will, I think, provide the rest of us some insight into what we might be thinking about doing. I'll just tell you from my museum's point of view, we have been, basically looking at guidelines the state of Massachusetts has provided to other organizations that have been able to open. So zoos and botanical gardens were in phase 1 out of 4 phases that Massachusetts has in place for reopening. And so we've been looking at the guidelines for them to think about, to sort of, anticipate what guidelines we might be given. We've also looked at guidelines for childcare centers and daycares, which were in phase 2. Museums, FYI, in Massachusetts are in phase 3 with casinos and theaters. So, so we don't know what guidelines will be given. We anticipate those will come later in the month or maybe in early July, and we'll go from there. And so in the meantime, we've also been looking at other states to children's museums and science centers, interactive spaces that have been able to open. Probably many of you have as well, looking at Texas and Florida, and seeing, sort of the I don't know, the logistics that they've worked through and sort of the guidelines for their staff that they've put into place. So, and of course, along the way, of course, we've been looking to Asia and Europe, where reopening, started well before us in the US. So, so this is like basically a lot of research that we've been doing, but I want to shift over to Beth, who has gone further because her museum is going to open this week.
Hey, thank you, Brindha. Yes, I'm from the Children's Museum in West Hartford, Connecticut, and we're a little bit earlier than I think many of you are, although I do think there was some Connecticut folks signed up who actually were involved in phase 1 of our reopening, which allowed for outdoor museums and zoo areas to open back at the end of May. So I'm curious if those folks are on this call. Love to hear some information in a bit as to how that's going. But as a children's museum, we were originally in phase 2 of our reopening in Connecticut, was originally scheduled for the 20th of June. Our governor has moved that up to the 17th. We at this point are not aiming for the 17th. We are looking hopefully at the 20th. although that's still in flux. I will say that I wish I could say for sure and be able to tell our visitors exactly what date that will be, but there's so many pieces to this, to how we're approaching this, that we want to make sure we have this right for both our visitors and our staff. At the Children's Museum here in West Hartford, we're a little unique in the Children's Museum world. We have a large live animal component. We have a preschool. We have a camp. We have a nature center, in addition to our Children's Museum component with our hands-on interactive. So we have a lot of different components that we have to kind of look at and weigh into this, how we're going to open our facility. We have had most of our staff off-site working remotely. Only a handful of people have been here, of course, with our live animals. That has been an essential need that we have, and our facilities folks and myself working on-site a good portion of the shutdown. We have started now to bring some of our staff back. We are staggering that staff. And so that right now is the challenge we're facing, is do we have enough staff? Can we have enough staff on site safely to open for our visitors? And in Connecticut, there's guidelines have been spelled out for us. We have a 50% capacity requirement, of course, social distancing, wearing of masks, one-way flow of traffic. That is actually in the guidelines that we have to try to adhere to as best we can. And in our state, we do need to go on as a business and certify that we are following all of the guidelines prior to opening. And I'm not sure if that is the case in other states as well. I'd be curious to hear that. But I think we, do we want to do that poll at this point?
Yep, I could get the poll going.
Good idea. Heather's got a short poll just to ask people about your organizations and when, if you've reopened, and if not, when you anticipate.
Looking more like more TBDs right now.
I do see there looks to be some people who have reopened or will be reopening this week or next. So we've got a good combination of folks at different levels of this preparing. So it's good to see. This can keep going here, but let me start off with the first question we'd like to pose and try to start to begin some feedback from you guys out there. And when we had you register, we tried to gauge what were you interested in learning about or inquiring about, what was kind of on your mind, concerns you had, and really the interactive piece of the reopening process, and what to do about that interactive piece, and how do you maintain that interactive piece really was the main theme or main question that came out from most of you. So our question for you guys are, how are you as your museums approaching these interactive spaces? And we'd really love to hear, if we could, first from some of those who have reopened or are looking to reopen very soon here, especially. What's your approach to interactive spaces? Are you removing interactives, or are you adapting your interactives to this situation? So if we have anybody out there that'd like to weigh in on what you're doing at your organization, that would be great.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. So I can speak for the Seco Science Center. We plan to open July 4th to the public as of now. That is not public information to the, but we're making our moves towards getting there. be as clean as possible open, so that everything isn't just completely hands-off. So for instance, our touch tank is going to be revised to the most delicate creatures being in the deeper end. If you guys are familiar with the Seco Science Center, it's two parts. One's shallower and the other is deeper. So that the shallower end is open for anyone to touch. It's more periwinkles, mussels, shapes and textures, so that they can be hands-on, encouraging hand washing still, but the deeper side being staffed only if we can have someone there staffed. We also plan on closing our discovery dock entirely for the same with our brand new 12-foot sand table. There's no way to keep that clean, so we are marking that off as well. But for everything else, including touchscreens and buttons, we are keeping open, but are going to have to keep a rigorous cleaning schedule on top of it, so that we don't just basically have anyone just looking at tanks and actually being able to learn from our other exhibits.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm curious, if I could ask a follow-up question of you on that. What is the rationale between the separation of the shallow and the deeper touch tank? Is it for the safety of the animals?
Yeah, so we've been trying to figure out a way to make our animals more safe, but also not take away from the visitor experience. So it's actually a long time coming, but COVID has rapidly increased that update to our touch tank. So it's kind of both. It's to mitigate the amount of people being drawn towards the touch tank as a feature in our center, and focusing hopefully more on other things as well, but to keep our animals safe is our main priority as well as our visitors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Who else do we have that might want to comment on what they're doing or how they're approaching some of their interactives at their location? Anybody? So,
hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm at Mystic Seaport Museum, so we were kind of lucky that we have a lot of outdoor space in Connecticut. So we were in phase 1 with outdoor museums and zoos. So most of our buildings and exhibits are still closed, and we're almost more like a park or botanic garden in our offerings right now. We just this week added back in that people can take out rowboats and sailboats or go on a captained boat ride. So some of our interactive stuff that's more outdoors is available. And then some of it has turned virtual with, we have QR codes, and our interpretation department has made like 2-minute videos about a bunch of our sites, so people can kind of scan those as they walk through the village, where they used to be able to kind of pop in and out of buildings and have an actual person explain things or talk to them about things. And then our education department has also been working pretty around the clock for virtual offerings, whether it's like our planetarium programs are now virtual. We have a virtual planetarium day camp, virtual kind of tours of our collections and artifacts for all different ages. We have one specific volunteer who kind of presents on one specific ship, and he's taken that, done a couple different Zoom presentations of that information. So a lot of the interaction is now virtual instead of kind of hands-on.
Okay. I'm curious, when you reopened your outdoors, how did your customers, were they eager to come back, did you feel, or were you happy with your return rate? Did that concern you at all?
Yeah, so we started with a soft opening for the first week, and didn't charge any admission, just kind of kept a count of attendance. So we were able to have 200 or 300 people on the grounds at once, and had maybe 500 to 1,000 people over the weekend. And now that we're charging about half price admission, and trying to include those free add-ons like the boat, borrowing boats or going on boat rides that used to be premium with a fee as part of that reduced admission. So we're definitely lower capacity than we were, but we're just kind of trying to like slowly build back up. And people do, probably in Connecticut, so like personally, one of my concerns was that there would be a little bit more pushback on that, and there really hasn't been. People are pretty used to that. The biggest question is kind of like, but we're outside, we still have to wear a mask. But even that, once you say like, yep, it's the state guideline, people have been pretty okay. And again, we're lucky to have the space to have that many people in here comfortably.
Great. Great feedback. Thank you. Does anybody else want to weigh in?
So Emma, just to confirm, you were using QR codes for people to access your virtual information. We had a question come in through the chat.
I saw my name like pop up. Yeah, so on the grounds, we have, I think, about a dozen QR codes at different sites for some of our ships and historic buildings. For the Massachusetts people, we're kind of like Old Sturbridge Village or Plymouth Plantation or like Colonial Williamsburg, kind of where we have like a working shipyard, a historic village, tall ships that people can go on. So yeah, so those QR codes people can scan and they're at specific sites as you walk around. And then our virtual, like kind of classroom or Zoom presentations are sent out, like a weekly schedule is sent out in almost like a newsletter for anyone who's signed up. And a lot of those are free, but then they also are kind of replacing scheduled field trips with like virtual field trips for a specific class or a specific teacher.
Okay. All right. Let me just tell you a little bit about also coming from Connecticut. Although at the museum we do have a nature center that has trails, that being outside. Actually, a lot of those trails go from our parking lot onto state land. So those trails have been open during this time. And at the museum we do have an outdoor component, but we opted not to open up the outdoors early on. We felt it was just not quite extensive enough to be able to justify that. But in terms of how we're approaching the hands-on, we're doing a combination of removing hands-on exhibits and adapting hands-on exhibits. The one-way flow requirement that we're faced with, or guidelines that we're faced with, make it challenging in an old building with multiple levels, multiple floors, where people have to cross each other if they're going upstairs or downstairs or in and out of small rooms and things like that. So we're actually taking the upper portion of our museum that allows for a one-way flow, and we're taking some classrooms that are connected to that flow and actually moving some of our exhibits. We're actually taking exhibit areas and moving them and staging them in this kind of one-way flow of visitor traffic to try to make sure we have a really large enough volume of material for our visitors to experience. So we are kind of adapting our areas, taking out some of our high, for example, we had just opened a early childhood learning lab for our preschool ages just before we shut down. That is full of very many manipulative pieces, would be very difficult to maintain and clean and have enough pieces to keep switching out. So we're removing that in favor of actually putting some of our other kind of lower touch exhibits into that space. The biggest question we have is, how will our families with young children, and I think in children's museums, that's where we see the bulk of our attendance, unlike some of you that maybe can reach a little bit older, how will they feel about that hands-off approach? And that's something that we really, until we can get our visitors in here and kind of see their reaction, it's one that we're just not sure what the outcome of that is going to be. Our one-way flow of traffic goes through our live animal sanctuary, and even that is usually a hands-on experience for people. We do live animal demonstrations. The children are involved in feeding time. For the safety of our staff and our animals, we're going to be removing those demos. It's going to be more of a hands-off approach to viewing the animals, at least to begin with. We want to make sure that we're keeping those animals safe as well. So that's another piece that we're doing. Our folks will empty out into our outside courtyard area where we have a live butterfly house. And that's usually even a hands-on piece where the kids are actually, on a release day, they help us to release butterflies. They actually take and hold a butterfly. Things like that are going to have to begin with not happen. And that's going to be more of a visual approach to even that type of exhibit. So I'm curious if there's anyone else out there who is thinking about the flow of that traffic through those exhibit areas and how they're approaching those customers, especially those customers with the young children. Because that's generally that very hands-on age. Yes, Jane?
Yeah, I can address that. So I'm Jane Bart. I'm the president of the Children's Museum of New Hampshire in Dover, New Hampshire. We do not have a reopening date yet. We were just told in New Hampshire that museums can begin opening June 15th, but that children's play areas and interactive exhibits should remain closed or modified. So we really need some more specification about what modified means to the state of New Hampshire. We are planning though, and we've been planning since we've been closed, different modifications we could make. For the traffic flow, luckily our museum is actually set up in a one-way circle on one floor, and we have a ramp that intersects the space. So we're going to use arrows that guide people in a path around the museum, up the ramp, around the second floor exhibits, and then down a back stairwell. So we will have a one-way flow of traffic just with arrows on the floor. But once again, they're children and we know they're going to go back and forth. So we're really grappling with what our role is and the role of our floor staff in policing versus just politely reminding people how to navigate the museum. For us, another biggest challenge is the fact that everything we have in the museum is interactive, and we are talking about a lot of manipulatives. So a few things we're already deciding to put in place is we will have, you have to make a reservation online like a lot of other museums are doing for 2-hour blocks. We'll have an hour between each 2-hour session where we have purchased an electrostatic sprayer and some other sprayers. So we will be disinfecting surfaces and allowing them to dry. And we will be taking all of our interactive manipulatives and putting them in groups of a third, and a third. And so all those hands-on manipulatives will be rotated in and out during every 2-hour block. We've also purchased small wall hanging trash, like trash receptacles for an RV. And we are going to be having those as basically dirty manipulative bins. So if somebody uses something or their child has put something in their mouth, that they can have a very clearly marked space to put it. And then for some larger materials, we'll have a clean bin as well, where they can access additional materials in exhibits and then put them in the dirty bin. We'll see if that works. It's questionable. People think that kids will just grab them and put them in whichever bin they want to, but we hope to make that really clear and set up the expectation that parents help with that. And then the Magic House in St. Louis is a children's museum that I believe just opened today. So we've been watching. If anyone wants to go to their website, Magic House, if you click on their reservations page, they've actually created a great video showing families what to expect when they come into the museum. And you can also see the way they set up their reservations. I'm also kind of stalking their page to see how many people are actually coming back, because another big question for all of us interactive museums is, are people going to feel comfortable coming back, or are we going to reopen our doors and be losing money every day that we're open? Because right now, looking at the Magic House, it looks like most of the people comfortable coming back are their members. So that's wonderful, But as we know, we need people paying admission through the door every day to afford all of these changes, the extra staffing, the cleaning protocols. So like Magic House, we're also planning on giving people, families, a group of manipulatives for each family that they use in our art studio, for example, and another exhibit where they build a flying contraption that they'll get like a kit of materials to use at a few spaces around the museum. So the works.
So Jane, thanks for sharing all of that. That's it's great to hear what you're planning. It's also nice to hear a lot of overlap, I think, with what others are thinking about. So that's really good. Of course, with the Tasted Toy Bins, I think the idea of being an interactive space and to retain the interactivity. I mean, our mission is our mission, and sometimes there's I don't it's hopefully not a hard choice between change the mission to stay open or be closed, so that you can hopefully we can all stay with the missions as our organizations have them. But to your point of wondering who is going to come and who is going to return, I know a number of museums, including mine, have done surveys of the community. Did you do the same? And to the whole group, have your organizations been thinking about hearing from your communities in order to understand what their expectations are and how you might manage those expectations going forward?
Doors tomorrow, people are not comfortable coming at all in the first month. It's months within our first month of reopening, except for members. We surveyed them a few weeks ago, so that might change over time as well. So there wasn't even the chance that we could reopen when we surveyed them.
I would say that the results from our survey is very similar to what both of you have indicated. There seems to be a high level of confidence in our members. They are eager to come back. I am concerned as to how they will feel about the changes once they do come back. They're very comfortable with the experience. Many of them have their favorite places they like to go to. And even the staff that they interact with. It's tough for me to approach the idea of staff being a little more hands-off from our visitor and at a distance from our visitor, because we're always encouraging that tight connection to actually be there working with our visitors. But we're going to need our staff to be at further distances, hands-off from them. And we're not quite sure how our members will approach that when they come back, the reality of that situation.
There was actually an interesting question in the chat about, are you guys doing any testing with families before you, more of the soft opening to see if everything will work properly?
I would say in our museum, we are not. We have reopened our preschool, so we have some experience there in that reopening piece, but we expect that our first week will be mostly dominated by members, and that will kind of be our slow approach. We're not doing any major marketing about that first week. We're going to kind of let that slowly happen in kind of more of a word of mouth, so that we can scale back if need be.
So we have actually extensive plans to test our sort of revised way of of our revised offer, I guess, with the public. And so, you know, we've sort of mapped out when we think we might be able to open in Massachusetts. And then from there, created some opportunities beforehand for our members, our, you know, beloved community that hopefully is, you know, very forgiving and loves us and might forgive any tiny flaws we might have. And then before bringing our members in, we'd like to kind of test our campus with a few sort of friends and family, so that, you know, we can actually test like what we think, you know, our best ideas that we're implementing, whether they are really good ideas or if actually, you know, we've just really kind of forgotten some big things. So we anticipate being told we'll need to implement a one-way flow. Zoos and botanical gardens in Massachusetts are constrained to 20% capacity. So we don't know, but, you know, perhaps that'll be a number for us as well. We are thinking about how important it is to message to visitors ahead of time, not just our members, but everyone. You know, we know our staff as well as our visitors probably have expectations for, you know, for hopes, I guess, that reopening might look a lot like what we look like when we closed. And, you know, I don't think that that's possible at all. So, you know, we're doing our best to keep our museum, to our museum's ethos, keep the interactives, keep the ability to play and play together, have fun. And when I say play together, I mean, you know, household units together. You got to respect that physical distancing. But thinking about reducing manipulatives, just like Jane and others have said, and, you know, and putting right up front our procedures for cleanliness and sanitation to try to assuage people's fears, but also building on hopefully their trust of us, you know, and what a great experience we've been able to provide in the past. But despite all of that, we absolutely are going to test our procedures with friendly faces before we fully open to the public.
Okay, I think there's an interesting question on the chat that's kind of related. Is it is a question about, is there a way to stay engaged with our visitors who are not able to come in while we are closed? So I think when we do reopen, there will be those people that aren't comfortable returning. We want to stay engaged with them. We need them to feel eventually comfortable coming back. And are there ways that anyone is working on being able to open and still reach those people who maybe are needing still that virtual connection that we've all become very good at over the last few months due to necessity? I can just comment from our museum. One of those ways for us is that we are hoping to continue to do some of our live animal demonstrations, doing those remotely. That's been a popular piece. And our butterfly house exhibit, we actually, what is usually a hands-on live component of releasing the butterflies, that may actually become a very special component of the virtual piece. So that for those people that aren't comfortable coming out, they can see kind of a very special, unique piece that usually draws a lot of bodies to our door for. So that's one way we're approaching that. Any other thoughts on that question? How you might juggle both being open to the public and still reaching people virtually?
I know Faith had some interesting comments in there, but I think it was more of the virtual component instead of the duality of it. So Faith, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm from the McAuliffe Shepherd Discovery Center in Concord, New Hampshire. Can you all hear me? Okay. Yes. It's weird with the ear, but okay. So since we closed mid-March, we have been offering distance learning on our website, and it started out being very haphazard because we went with the governor's instructions to schools, which was basically you've got a week to become a distance learning. Like, this is what you do starting a week from now. Have at it. So for the first, I'd say, month, we were very like frantically just going, get some content up there, just get some content up there to remind people we still exist. And it was not as cohesive as we would have liked, but got the remaining staff who are not furloughed really familiar with what it's like to record yourself reading a book or to walk someone through an activity using photographs on your iPhone. So once we got really we were more deliberate about hitting various age groups, developmental levels, a mix of reading versus actually hands-on versus this is just I can talk a lot about what we've been doing virtually. It's been great, but we do have concerns, and I see there's a question in the chat about an opening date. So we have a soft opening starting this weekend for 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. We are doing outdoor activities only. They will be basically self-led, so we will have instructions and materials outdoors in our yard, essentially, on picnic tables, and we're restricting them to one family or one group per table. So essentially you come in or you're not in anywhere, but you come up to the tables and you do that activity with the people that you came in with. And if another family or another group is waiting, we have other tables with other activities. So that's really keeping the groups cohesive amongst themselves, so that the visitors aren't interacting too much with other visitors. We're doing that for a couple of weeks, and we don't have a real opening date because, again, we have to get the decals on the floor to direct traffic flow, and we have to think about how we know how many people are in what areas. But yeah, but we do have concerns about how that will impact our staff, because it's a lot of staff power to keep on. So when between actually going into the museum, even if we're not open, even if our staff are physically in the building, putting signs up and putting things on the floor, that's time that we're not putting lessons up on the website. So I don't know, I would be interested in other people's feedback, because we do have a concern about just how to maintain those two things at once. The stretch.
Okay. So it's a big challenging question. I know we too are moved heavily into virtual education, and right around the corner we're looking at bringing our summer camp program physically back to our museum. So our educators are going to have to shift gears very quickly from remote to in-person to do camp. So it's a heavy emphasis for those educators to be multitasking between those two, and we'll have to see how well that goes.
And to follow up on that thought, we're doing virtual summer camps, and at first we didn't even know if we could do summer camps at all. We did a lot of deliberation and realized that yes, it was feasible if we did it in a virtual format. And then we basically resolved, because our summer camps will be going through like mid-August. We basically said, look, even best case scenario, there's a magical vaccine and everything opens up and everyone is raring to go. Like, these camps are virtual no matter what, because we can't, like, it took so much work to convert them to virtual that, maybe people will not want to come in August because they'll be so sick of virtual and they'll just want in-person experiences, but we just don't have the capacity in our staff to, it took so much to make them virtual in the first place. It's like, this is just go or no go. We can't go one, back and forth.
Yes, I know in Connecticut, our restrictions have really modified how many children we can bring in for camp, which is certainly a challenge in meeting your budget goals, but it's also, it actually limits the amount of staff we have to have working with them because we're limited in the number of children. So that in itself allows some of our educators to still be doing other functions, which is good.
If it's okay, I'd like to shift us just a little bit to bring up or maybe just address again, offer up the opportunity for anyone to ask questions about sort of how hands-on learning can happen in our museums when we reopen. So a number of you all wrote in about this, and so I just want to make sure that we are providing sufficient time for people to either ask their questions, raise issues around it, or provide their input on how you all are thinking about doing this. We did have a comment earlier from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which is a giant museum, and the comment was, look, we're so big with so many people, we've got to go to low touch, no touch. On the other hand, there and perhaps that is just a question of size, and 20% for them is not 20% for Discovery Museum in Acton, Mass. But to think about interactive spaces, if we are able to continue with our hands-on learning goals and ideals, how are you thinking about keeping that going? We've heard some ideas about, right, like reducing, maybe removing some manipulatives, spreading exhibits out, perhaps taking a few off gallery, maybe ones with sand or with non-porous, porous materials. But are there any other questions that people want to raise around the idea of hands-on learning in our organizations? Interactive experiences in our organizations.
Hey, Brenda, this is Shana. Can you hear me? So one of the things we've really been considering here is, and I'm at the Sea Science Center in Manchester, New Hampshire, is not just what we can clean for protection of the virus, but how that cleaning, especially with younger children where they might stick a lot of materials in their mouths with the cleaning materials on them, really trying to reduce our sort of ecological impact and making sure that a lot of the cleaners we use are food safe in case children do start putting things in their mouth. Because we're anticipating, especially when we start, our staff are going to be a little freaked out as well and probably using a lot more cleaner than they need to clean the different surfaces. So we're really looking at it from the staff safety perspective, but as well looking at those surfaces and making sure we're going as minimally toxic as possible. So we have a lot of cleaners we already had on site that we're actually going to be putting in the back closet and starting with a little bit more eco-friendly options to make sure that as we are using more and more of these, we are not endangering people that way as well.
That's a great point, Shana. That's another really important thing to think about. How, visitor safety and, are we doing all the cleaning? Perhaps that is a way to go. And what are we using that's safe? I think a lot of people have been looking to the EPA and CDC, right, for their list of materials that are apparently effective against the coronavirus. I'll just put, go ahead, Jane, you've got something.
Just as far as remaining an educational resource and interacting with our visitors, I also agree with what Beth said, that really we're pivoting and saying that our employees on the floor are not supposed to be having those normal interactions with visitors and are not supposed to be doing their normal role as educators on the museum floor. And the same thing will go, like we typically have 3 different activities or demonstrations where we gather people 3 times a day, and we're not going to do that anymore. And so what can we do? We've been experimenting with a couple of things. One is all of our summer camps, instead of going virtual, children's museums around the country are doing this, like summer camp in a kit boxes. We actually ended up tripling our summer camp participation by going from live to the virtual boxes. Or they're not virtual, they're boxes with 25 activities. So that was surprising and a great thing to be surprised about. But our education team has been tasked with thinking of ways that they can be serving people either at home or through other organizations like libraries. We typically travel around the state and do traveling library programs in the summer. Since we can't travel those, we created videos on a series called Engineer a Fairy Tale, and libraries are now paying us to access those videos, and we're creating take-home kits for each of the kids. So we'll be traveling to libraries with these individual kits of materials that then libraries can give to families. So it's just always trying to think outside of the box and how we're going to serve people, because realistically, we know that school groups won't be coming to the Children's Museum in the next year either. So what can we bring to them, and how can we be a resource in a totally different way than what we've done in the past? So we're assuming this coming year, education within the building in the way it's been before will not be happening.
Yeah, I'll say that I think, you know, the pandemic in one way has given us the ability to maybe, you know, think a bit more about people we haven't been able to reach before. Granted, you know, virtual offerings or digital offerings require access to the web, so there's, you know, a restriction there. But for folks who have access but physically haven't been able to, you know, come to your organization, the digital content can be a way to provide content to them. And you know, we did take we expanded on some of our initiatives to reach out to folks in our community who you know, are receiving food supplies from the local schools and from food pantries, and we're able to provide our content, physical content, to them, and you know, sort of build on the connection that way, and build on a resource that was already in the community, but, you know, slotted in our resources as we could. So there is a question about enforcing physical distancing, traffic flow, touching guidelines, and or no touching, no touching, and how to support our staff, our either frontline staff or folks who sort of need to become frontline staff in order to reopen and have some success. Does anyone want to talk about their ideas for either doing this training and support for staff? I know in our museum, we're starting to think about sort of de-escalation and mediation training to be able to support our frontline staff. Has anyone else been either thinking along these lines or have ideas for reopening and kind of supporting your frontline people?
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing people's approach on that. I would say some things came out in our survey that kind of said to us, we need to think about how we're going to approach some of our customer service and reactions to people. And one of the things that did come out in our member survey was our members' concern, believe it or not, about having to wear masks. Even though that is the guideline, and that is the guideline in our state. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we're thinking about. How are our staff going to approach that? I was surprised by the amount of people reluctant to want to have to wear masks inside of our building. And I'm sure that's going to become a challenge that our staff, frontline staff, has to face. I'm curious if there's any other thoughts on that that people have out there.
We had the same thing.
An earlier question also came up if you guys are also giving out masks. I think that kind of goes along with the whole mask wearing thing inside too.
Our sort of dichotomy, people are very polarized. mask, or people say they will enter the museum if we require them or their children to wear masks. Is most concerned about situations, or another organization that a larger museum down south opened, and they had someone who was stationed at the door just had extra masks with them. They had extra to give people who didn't have them, and just like was mentioned earlier, when people came up without masks, said, "Oh, here you go, here's your mask today." Like it was just sort of a casual, this is what we're doing here, and trying to de-escalate it before they even got in the door. Day one, they said they had 500 visitors. This was a large, like, World War II museum. And they said that they didn't have a single person push back on the masks when approached in this way. But that's definitely our biggest concern. Our staff's biggest concern is dealing with people who have that issue. So we did promise that we would always have a management person to back people up. So if it's, we're gonna have to change staff schedules. So, you know, I'm there, or we have one of the directors there on a Sunday if someone comes in and is having an issue. So they know that we'll give them techniques, but they don't have to be the be all end all. There will be someone to turn to deal with those difficult situations.
I'm also curious of if people are looking at requiring children to be wearing masks, and how young of children to be wearing masks. Is there any thoughts on that out there? I think that seems to be the concern with some of our parents, the inability for children to realistically wear those masks.
Well, in Massachusetts, the guidelines are for anyone who is 2 years of age and older, who is physically able to, right? Like physically or doesn't have a medical condition to prohibit wearing a mask. So anyone in that group over the age should message to all visitors, our community, that if you're going to visit our campus, you need to have a mask. We will have, to Lynn's question earlier, we will have some masks available for folks who somehow, you know, despite entering the campus and being, you know, prompted, you know, asking if they really have made their reservation for this time spot, and great, you know, please park, put on your masks, and then, you know, come on up to the building. If somehow people still show up without a mask, or perhaps lose their mask during their visit, we will have masks to share. But that isn't, you know, we're asking people to come in with their own masks to be prepared.
And that's the same approach that we're taking as well.
NEMA is also working on a new, another town hall on de-escalation tips along with visitor services. So stay tuned for that one. So we are definitely, that's come up a couple times in conversation. So we are working on that right now.
And one thing in terms of masks, I've heard, I think the Children's Museum of Houston has, they especially stocked up on child-sized masks, and are noting that they're very helpful, you know, for young people. So that's I think, you know, cost-wise is a little more challenging to have in place, but like I think a really nice idea, and something that, like, if we can do it, we'll do it. And then some folks have also been, you know, masks make it difficult to read faces of other people, or to read lip. And so sort of exploring the feasibility of having masks that have clear fronts, or you know, or maybe each staff person's face near to you know, near to our own face, just to, you know, sort of have like a reference point for visitors, which might be a less expensive way to go than purchasing masks with clear fronts. Also, you know, it's one thing to sort of have the idea of a clear front mask and then talk about the effectiveness of it. So, you know, you don't want to wear a mask if it's not really effective. So there's that balance. But there are a number of ideas, I think, surrounding wearing masks that can help people for whom masks are sort of a deterrent to communication or engagement.
I think there's a suggestion in the chat that maybe posing a reason for wearing masks is to help protect your staff. And I think that's an excellent idea. You know, I think so many of our visitors come to appreciate our staff. They know them, they love them, and we're constantly hearing how they miss them. So I think that's a great way to approach it. If our customers really are going to feel for the fact that the staff is here for them and that they can help to keep them safe. Excellent idea.
On that thought, that also, hi, this is Betsy Loring from Exploring Exhibits. To Brindha, on your point on Houston, they are selling those masks, those children's masks. They're available for sale right at where you hand in your ticket or whatever. I also wonder, in terms of protecting staff, I mean, that's like OSHA requirements. I also wonder how many people could speak to their insurance agents or any legal advice they can get, because I think that people tend to respect when they say our insurance company requires this for the protection of our staff, or this is the legal advice we're getting. I just wonder whether that might also help that idea of protecting staff. It's like, what do we do? It's the lawyers, it's the state, you know, they always have stupid regulations, you know? Not that I think that this is a stupid thing.
Yeah, it's a good point, Betsy. I mean, you know, as much as possible, you know, if it's possible to put the onus on, right, like someone of important, I mean, any visitor of ours who can go find the governor is welcome to, but like the governor said, here's the requirement for masks, but for anybody, but you know, that's not true in all states to have people wear masks. I don't know in terms of insurance, does anybody have anything to weigh in on there?
I think you're asking for a workers' comp claim if a worker gets sick because they weren't adequately protected. I mean, I would certainly be scared as a senior staff member if my staff got sick on the job. I mean, there's OSHA regulations about protecting people and providing a safe workplace. If we're knowingly exposing people to a virus that, you know, hospitals are saying, you know, if your heart stops with COVID, you're a do not resuscitate. I mean, that seems like a pretty clear reason to want my employer to protect me.
I would say in Connecticut, these state reopening guidelines are very specific about staff and the need to wear masks. So I think a lot of those guidelines are going to be in your state's mandates, and in some cases they are a lot more they're a lot more specific for staff than they are for our customers. I'll use, for example, in Connecticut, if you were to look at just the running of a day camp and the protocols around that, children not having to wear masks when they're outside or when they're in their camp room, yet as an employer, our instructors have to, our educators have to. So sometimes one program's protocols are not as strong as another. And that seems to be the case when you're looking at what's required of staff versus what's required of some of the visitors in a particular program. And that can be a challenge. Any other thoughts on that? Any other questions people are having that we're not addressing? I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. Any other questions out there?
So the question that is coming up from Abby, I think that's a different webinar all the way around that we should have about the costs and running costs and visitation and stuff. Speaking of which, it is the noon hour. We were scheduled for an hour on this one. if you guys ever have any questions or thoughts on future town halls or webinars, definitely contact a NEMA staff member. We're more than happy to explore those options. We want to hear from our membership on how we could serve you better and stuff like that. So we could definitely continue these conversations in different town halls. Definitely check out the NEMA website for future ones coming up. Again, suggestions, go ahead, contact NEMA staff. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I do want to thank Beth and Brindha for coming together to convene this town hall. I appreciate all of the knowledge that has been shared amongst the group and amongst our members. It's great to see. Brindha, Beth, do you have any final words?
No, I thank everybody for joining us. It's always good to hear that you're not alone in this struggle and what other people are doing to address the issue. So thank you.
I second that. Thank you all for the really good conversation, and I will continue to be looking, to your museums before mine opens, and hope to hear from any of you about questions you have once we're all gradually reopening in Massachusetts anyway. Probably behind all the rest of the states, but it's for a good reason.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.